What's up everyone, Vinny Musso from Musso Athletics here for day 6 of our 30 days of force. More than halfway through our talks about force absorption. So what we'll get into today is progressive overload. So today might be a little more sciencey than some of the other videos. Won't go get too complex, but I do think if we have a basic understanding of what is going on, in our bodies while we're working on these concepts, I think it helps to help us, understand it a little bit more, and makes it a little bit easier to, apply that, whether again we're training ourselves or we're training, someone else in athletics or rehab or whatever the situation. Okay. So like I said, progressive overload is the topic today. So what is progressive overload? Kind of really a basic way to think about it is it's the controlled increase of a stimulus or stimuli that your body is exposed to. So it's increasing the demand that your body has to respond to in a controlled fashion. That's why it's progressive overload. It's not just complete overload. We don't want to go 0 to 100. So if we look at some of the exercises that we've done before in some of the videos of this series, we don't want to go from doing like a single leg absolute unilateral eccentric box squat with we start with like a 30-pound dumbbell. We don't want to do a 30-pound dumbbell on day 1, and then day 2 we're jumping to a 70 or 80-pound dumbbell. We progressively overload it. So we start at 30, then we bump that up 35, 40, or whatever method you're using to progressively overload the system. And we'll go into some techniques, some good ways to work on progressive overload, specifically for force absorption. We'll go into more details about progressively overloading our other aspects of force, our force redirection, our force production, but today we'll focus again on our force absorption. Okay. So before we go into the different techniques for progressively overloading our force absorption capabilities, I did want to go a little bit into the science or the background of kind of what happens, in split seconds in the body while or sometimes in more prolonged periods of time when we're, under greater lengths of time of force and stress. But I just wanted to go, a little bit more into detail because, again, like I said in the beginning, I think having a basic understanding of what's going on in the body helps us understand it a little bit better. Okay, so you'll have to pardon my artwork. Art is not my strong suit, but I think for the sake of what we're talking about, I think this should suffice. But there's two mechanisms that I wanted to talk a little bit more in detail about, and those are our Golgi tendon organs, or our GTOs, and our muscle spindles. And like I've talked before early on in this series, there's a lot of research that goes on about what's happening in the body. It always seems like it's never ending, what we're learning about the body. But these two concepts, are very studied and very agreed upon, in the strength and conditioning community. But like I said, always research going on. But as of right now, these two concepts, very, very common and very, very accepted as to explain kind of what's going on, in our muscles and in our body. Okay. So to go into a little bit more detail, so again, these two mechanisms in the body, very similar but opposite tasks that they control. You can think almost like these two systems kind of going through like an internal struggle in your body, because they both will react to similar stimuli, but one wants to do one thing and one wants to do the other opposite thing. Okay, so if we talk about our Golgi tendon organs first, okay, so if we look at our drawing here, this is a drawing of a muscle. So this kind of wider part is our muscle belly, and then the narrower part here are our tendons, or what connect our muscle to the bone. And basically what the Golgi tendon organs, what that system is you basically have receptors on the tendons of your muscles that connect your muscles to the bone. So we have sensors on our tendons and sensors on the muscle itself. So what happens with our Golgi tendon organs, or our GTOs, which I'll refer to them from now on, is these they will sense the tension that a muscle is experiencing, okay? So basically what's happening in our GTOs is it's kind of like a self-preservation system in the body, an anti-injury or an injury prevention mechanism that the body has. Basically what happens when our muscle is lengthening and getting put on a lot of tension, what this system does, based on the tension that these sensors in the tendons sense, what your body says is, okay, my muscle's tightening, it's lengthening, it's getting stretched out. There's a lot of tension going on. I'm worried that muscle's going to tear. Okay, so what the body does is it will send a signal to that muscle to essentially turn off and to release all tension. Okay, what your body is thinking is, okay, that muscle's getting put on tension. Okay, if I release the tension and just don't fight against it, that tension won't cause the muscle to tear. Okay, so without again going too much into the science, your sensors here on the tendon, all right, this black part right here, senses the tension, okay, sends a signal to the spinal cord, okay, and then the spinal cord, if that tension gets too high, then sends a signal to the muscle to turn off, okay, so we have it drawn in red, okay, so it's inhibitory. It tells the muscle to turn off, okay, so again, in quick summary, our Golgi tendon organs, they sense tension in the muscle, and essentially if that tension in the muscle gets too great, the body tells the muscle to turn off, okay, so it won't tear. Okay, so that's our first mechanism. Okay, our second mechanism, our muscle spindle, very similar to our Golgi tendon organs, but whereas opposed to our Golgi tendon organs, we have a sensor on our tendons. For our muscle spindles, that sensor is actually in the muscle belly itself. Okay. And whereas our Golgi tendon organs sense muscle tension, our muscle spindles sense muscle length, okay? So GTOs sense muscle tension, muscle spindles sense muscle length, okay? And the other opposite thing, or the main opposite thing between our muscle spindles and our GTOs, where our GTOs, in response to that tension, turn the muscle off so it doesn't tear, our muscle spindles will send a signal to actually contract the muscle. So it wants to fight against that, that stimuli that the muscle is experiencing. So a really easy way to think about that for our muscle spindles, when we've gone to the doctors for checkups and they take their hammer and, hit your knee, that knee-jerk reaction where your knee kicks out, without you doing anything, that is a really good way to think of how your muscle spindles work, okay? You're not actively kicking your leg out, okay? Your muscle is responding to that quick change in length from the tap from that hammer, very strategically placed. It's reacting to that difference in muscle length and is, activating and contracting your quad to straighten your knee. Okay, so those are the main differences between those two, body systems. Our GTOs sense tension, and in response to that tension, if the tension gets too great, it turns the muscle off, because that's the way that system thinks it's protecting itself from the muscle being torn. Our muscle spindles, in very similar fashion, sense the change in length in the muscle, gets the signal sent to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord sends a signal here, and this blue arc here sends a signal to contract. So that wants to fight against. So that's, more your knee-jerk reflex is a good way to think of your muscle spindles. And, like I said earlier, there's kind of like this internal struggle between those two body systems. One wants to turn the muscle off, and one wants to contract and activate the muscle, okay? So if we think about it, you know, whether we're talking about an athlete in, you know, performing an athletic movement, or, you know, someone going about their everyday life, you know, think about, you know, which one of these, you know, would be, I don't want to say more helpful, because obviously our GTOs, you know, do play a role in injury prevention. You know, there are going to be situations where this does prevent injury. But for the most part, if we think about which one of these two systems we want to really, you know, be more at play, it's our muscle spindles. And the reason for that, so let's use, let's take a construction worker, you know, as an example. All right, and that construction worker is carrying, you know, he's carrying a, you know, a box, you know, whatever he's carrying, you know, a pretty heavy box, okay, and he's got to go up a small flight of stairs. Okay, so he's got, you know, a pretty, you know, high external load on his body, you know, more force that his body has to absorb. And let's say when he goes to step up on that first step, right, and he, you know, puts his weight down in the step to propel himself up the steps, what do you think would happen if our GTOs took over, sensed that change in tension in the muscle, and just turned the muscles in his leg off, essentially? So his leg buckled as he's carrying, you know, a 40 or 50 pound box. You know, you know, it goes without saying, we don't want that to happen. You know, we don't want our muscles in a situation like that to experience a force and then turn off. You know, then our knee buckles, he falls, and he gets injured. So, you know, the GTOs thought they were preventing, you know, injury from like a muscle tear, but now the body's experienced a different injury because that construction worker now just fell, you know, with 40 or 50 pounds on him. Okay, so you can see how in that situation we would want our GTOs to activate, or we would not want our GTOs to activate. Okay, we would want our muscle spindles to kind of use that, you know, reflexive muscle contraction to help propel him up the stairs with that heavier load. You know, and same thing can be applied to athletics. You know, an example I used a couple videos ago, you know, a basketball player going up for, you know, for a 2-footed dunk, okay? So he essentially propels himself into that 1-2 stop, okay? Essentially free falling into that 1-2, experiencing a lot of force when that, you know, the body hits the ground in that 1-2 step. So when the body experiences that increased, you know, that increased force on the body, what do we want to happen? Do we want the muscles to sense that and turn off, and essentially knees buckle, just collapse to the floor? Or do we want, you know, our muscles to kind of reflexively contract and help us, you know, produce more force? Okay, I think it goes without saying that in those situations, you know, having our GTOs activate would be doing us a disservice. Okay, so the point, getting back to our topic of progressive overload, essentially what progressive overload does is it teaches our body to almost override this GTO system, okay? So if we can control how our body is exposed to more and more force that it has to absorb, so we progressively overload, again, in a controlled manner, the stimuli that our body has to react to, we can essentially increase the threshold that this system wants to kick in, okay? So let's say, again, like for our absolute unilateral eccentric single leg bench squat where we're holding a weight, you know, let's say our body can only handle, you know, for a 40-pound dumbbell. You know, it gets to the point where, you know, any more weight, you know, the body would, you know, the GTOs would kick in, and the muscles that are experiencing that force would just turn off. Okay, so if we try to jump from 40 to a 40-pound dumbbell to an 80-pound dumbbell right away, chances are when we went down with that 80 pounds, we'd hit that point where the GTOs kick in and that leg just buckles. Okay, and obviously, you know, we don't want that to happen. But what progressive overload does, we start with that 30 or 40-pound dumbbell. Okay, we, you know, train the body to control that. You know, the brain says, okay, you know, I can handle this. You know, let's try a little bit more. So now we, you know, increase that stimuli that the body feels, you know, a little bit more next workout. Okay, a little bit tougher than the first workout, but again, because it's controlled and it's progressive. Okay, then we do that same movement, and the body's like, okay, you know, I can handle this too. And we keep training in that fashion. So now, whereas if originally we tried to jump from a 30 or 40 pound dumbbell to 80 pounds, the GTOs would kick in and the muscles would just turn off and our leg would buckle. Now we've, progressively in a controlled manner, slowly increased the stimulus that the body is exposed to. Now over time, we've gone from 40 pounds, 30, 40 pounds to 80 pounds, okay? So we've progressively overloaded the body to be able to absorb more force, okay? Whereas originally, if we tried to do it too quick, our GTOs would take over and then our muscle would be inhibited during that movement. So that is the main takeaway of this this video, is to show the importance of progressive overload, because we want to, particularly in athletics, we want to train the body to be able to handle more force, because the body undergoes a lot of force in athletic movements and athletic events. So the body has to be able to absorb a lot of force without our GTOs kicking in. Okay, we want our muscle spindles to help us more. Okay, and progressive overload helps us basically almost turn this system off, or basically pushes us more towards using our muscle spindles as opposed to our GTOs. Okay, so progressive overload helps us accomplish that. And like I said, we're going to talk now about a couple techniques for force absorption, progressively overloading our force absorption. We'll talk more about progressive overload for our other aspects of force redirection, our force production. But for this video, for the sake of time too, we're going to keep it with our force absorption. So some techniques that we can use to progressively overload our body's capability of absorbing force. So if we look at a lot of the exercises that we've done already in the previous videos, one way that we can progressively overload our muscles in our body to absorb force is to increase the volume, or basically the amount of work that we're doing. Okay, so a couple sub-techniques for that. One way is to increase the amount of sets. So again, let's use the example I've used so far in the video, our absolute unilateral eccentric single leg box squat. Let's say we're using the same weight, but whereas, maybe we did, for 1 week, we were doing 3 sets of 6 on each leg. The next week, we can use that same weight, but now instead of 3 sets of 6, we're doing 4 sets of 6. Okay, so the weight stayed the same, but since we're increasing our sets, we're actually doing a higher volume of work. So that's one technique we can use. Another technique, very similar to our sets, is to increase the reps. So same example, we use the 30-pound dumbbell, 1 week, 3 sets of 6. Now our next week, we may bump that up to 3 sets of 8. Okay, so that is, again, same weight that we've been using, but since we're increasing the number of reps we're doing, we're increasing the overall volume of that movement, we are progressively overloading the body. Okay. Another sub-technique for our increasing volume is to increase our time under tension. Okay, so let's take that same example, our 30-pound dumbbell. Now we keep our sets the same, we keep our reps the same, but we're increasing our time under tension now. So let's say the first week we did that exercise, we were doing 4 seconds on the way down. So a nice controlled, as we hold the dumbbell at the chin, 4 seconds on the way down, tap the box, or we set ourselves down on the box, second leg down, reset, do it again, okay? That first week we did, I already forgot what I said, 4 seconds, I believe. So 4 seconds in the first week, and then the second week we can bump that up to 6 seconds on the way down. So instead of 4 seconds on the way down, now we're doing 6 seconds on the way down. So we've kept the weight the same, we've kept the sets and the reps the same, but since we've increased our time under tension, we have progressively overloaded the body, because the muscles are working harder because they have to control that weight for a longer amount of time. Okay, so those are a couple ways in terms of volume to progressively overload the body. Our second technique is to increase the weight. Again, this is probably, very common one. you see, you know, bodybuilders, you know, this is something that they, you know, one of the main techniques that I see them use. You know, one day you're doing 3 sets of 10 bench press with 135. You keep that. You keep the 3 sets of 10 the same for a couple workouts, same weight, but then the next, you know, maybe after a week or 2 weeks, you're still doing 3 sets of 10, but you bump the weight up to, you know, 145 or 150. Okay, so again, very, very common way to do it. You know, a lot of people are familiar with this way. You just increase the weight that your body, you know, is, you know, in our case, absorbing. So this can be applied to both our slower eccentrics and our rate of eccentric force development. So for our exercise example that we've been using so far, that single leg movement, okay, now instead of the 30-pound dumbbell, we've done that for, you know, for a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. Now we're doing 35 pounds, okay, so we're increasing the weight. And we can do the same thing with our rate of force development. So let's take our depth drops that we've seen so far, where we're just stepping off the box, landing in that nice athletic position. Again, sticking that landing as quickly as we can. So we want to stick without sinking down any further. We can do that same exercise with the same height box, but now hold, you know, a 5-pound dumbbell. Okay, and again, this is not something you would want to start with body weight and then just, you know, try to hold a 30-pound dumbbell while you're doing that. Again, you want a controlled progressive overload. Okay, so you wouldn't want to go right to that 30-pound dumbbell. You can take the same height box, maybe hold, you know, a 5-pound dumbbell, drop off, stick that landing. Okay, so increasing the weight that we are using and absorbing can be applied to both of our methods of force absorption training, our slower eccentrics and our rate of force development. Another way we can progressively overload the body for force absorption is to increase the increase the demand. Basically, this applies a little bit more to our rate of force development. So we're increasing the stimulus that the body has to absorb. Where, you know, let's take that example, our depth drop. Let's say we started on an 18-inch box. Now we progress to a 24-inch box. Okay, so we've increased the height. We've increased the demand on the body. We still want to get the same result that we had stepping off of that 18-inch box, where we step off and stick as soon as we hit the land. But now we have to do that same thing from a higher box. So now 24 inches, same thing. As soon as we hit the ground, we want to stick. Okay? So increasing the height that we, you know, are landing from to greater simulate landing from a jump, you know, in an athletic event is one way in the demand section that we can, you know, progressively overload the body. Another way, added force. Okay, so you'll see one of the exercise examples at the end of this video will be our skater sticks that we've done, that I showed in the past. Remember, our skater sticks start on one leg, laterally jump over as far as you can, land on that other leg. We can overload that by adding, you know, attaching ourselves to a band. You know, those long resistance bands that a lot of gyms have. Anchor that to something nice and stable. Put it around your waist. Okay. Now you're not only having to absorb the force that you produce over and land, but now you have to absorb both what you produce and what the band pulls you with. Okay. So we've added the amount of force that our body has to stabilize against. Okay. So again, topic of today, our progressive overload. Again, the importance of it is, you know, trying to inhibit our body system that essentially wants to turn our muscles off. Okay, so progressive overload will allow us to absorb more force without this GTO, you know, taking over. And, you know, like we said in the beginning, the importance of force absorption. The more force that you can absorb, the more force you will be able to produce. So again, you can see how important that would be in an athletic event. You know, when we used our, you know, construction worker example, again, showing how important this is, you know, not only in sports and athletics, but in our everyday lives. So take a look at some of the exercise examples here. Again, you'll see some similar exercises to what we've done so far, but with these exercises are now done in you know, using progressive overload, where we're either using more weight or we're increasing the height of, you know, one of the exercises that we've done, or we're adding, you know, extra force that we have to stabilize against. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and if you haven't yet, go ahead and follow Amuso Athletics on Instagram for more great training content. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you the next day.